Support for Focus Black Oklahoma on the KOSU Podcast Network comes from the Black Church Traditions and African American Faith Life program at Phillips Seminary, with a weekly chapel service celebrating Black History and African Heritage Month online at wherefaithleads.com/heritage.
This is Focus Black Oklahoma. I'm Colby Webster.
And I'm Ariel Davis. Focus Black Oklahoma and KOSU Radio were awarded a Solutions Journalism Network grant to examine how COVID-19 has affected the North Tulsa community in a three-part series called The Black Plague. The first segment explored the pandemic's effect on youth. The second segment examined domestic violence. And this, our final program, will look at evictions and homelessness. Even before the pandemic, Tulsa was a hotbed for evictions. It was 11th in the country for forcing tenants out of their homes. In 2016, the city's eviction rate stood at 7.77%, which was higher than the state's overall rate of 4.24%. And 1 in 3 households are rent burdened, meaning they spend more than 30%, that's $30 out of every $100 of their income on rent. And the pandemic has exacerbated the situation.
According to Oklahoma Policy Institute's Open Justice Initiative, from March 15, 2020 through January 27, 2021, there were nearly 20,000 evictions filed statewide. Of those, at least 8,000 are in legal jeopardy of losing their homes during the pandemic. In Oklahoma County, more than 7,200 evictions were filed, placing 2,000 families at risk. And in Tulsa County, more than 5,600 evictions were filed, leaving 2,300 families vulnerable. President Joe Biden has extended the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's moratorium on evictions through March 2021, a welcome reprieve for many facing an uncertain future during this time. But many are still left feeling worried and apprehensive about what the future holds.
The Terry West Civil Legal Clinic of the University of Tulsa's College of Law has created 2 reports examining evictions in Tulsa County in the past year. The first report was released in June 2020, titled Advancing Housing Justice in Tulsa, an examination of the Fed docket. It combines students' observations and data analysis highlighting procedural irregularities, access to justice barriers, power imbalances between landlords and tenants, and legal ethics concerns at the eviction docket. The report has informed broader advocacy efforts around eviction practices, courtroom processes, and legislative reforms to improve access to justice for marginalized communities.
The second report was released in January of this year, called Leveling the Playing Field. It focuses on access to counsel in eviction proceedings. The report shows that representation is essential in order to advance justice, uphold due process, and ensure people are able to take advantage of relief measures linked to the COVID-19 crisis. It also points to the cost savings from access to counsel programs and highlights the toll that eviction takes, not just on those who are displaced, but also on neighborhoods, communities, and public resources. Ronnie Amit is the Assistant Clinical Professor of Law and the Director of the Terry West Civil Legal Clinic at the University of Tulsa College of Law. She says the two reports build upon each other.
This report was really building on an earlier report that the clinic students did 2 semesters ago now, in the spring of 2020. It's kind of been just a progression. So what happened was the students were going to court and observing eviction hearings and noticing various issues. So the first report documented what they saw and then also did a deep dive into the docket for 1 month to really identify trends around the eviction docket. This report, what the students did in this fall semester, was based on those findings, looking at what are some of the implications of what's happening at the court. And we know that Tulsa has a very high eviction rate. So they looked at the question of right to counsel and the fact that most tenants are unrepresented, what that means, not just for the individual tenant, but also for the city of Tulsa and for the communities in which these people live.
Amit believes there are a few factors that contribute to Tulsa's high eviction rate.
I think the ease of eviction filings and the fact that landlords are able to file evictions, and in most cases, they're not challenged, because if people don't show up for their eviction hearings, and there's a variety of reasons to that, then landlords get a default eviction judgment without actually having to prove their case. You have landlord attorneys and eviction companies that have this business model that's based on doing eviction filings for landlords. So that creates a certain incentive structure for evictions to continue. And then also you have the legislation that's very landlord friendly and doesn't have a lot of protections for tenants. And then just a lack of affordable housing.
She says the pandemic has exacerbated an already precarious situation.
Then you have the eviction moratoriums, which have offered some protections, but they haven't made the rent go away. So people are still going to owe a lot of money when the moratoriums are lifted, and everyone's very worried about how that's going to play out. Also, it's a problem for landlords, particularly for mom and pop landlords who only own 1 or 2 properties. If their tenant isn't paying the rent because of the moratorium, then they have to float that money, and they may not be in a position to pay their mortgage if they're not getting their rent. So you could see increased foreclosures as well. And then again, you're going to lose more available housing on the rental market. It's hugely problematic. It's really important that these moratoriums be accompanied by rental assistance. And I think everyone's a little anxious about what's going to happen down the line.
Amit's students recently took part in a virtual pop-up legal clinic for residents in North Tulsa and the Greenwood area. The idea is to assist populations who may be harder to reach. The team also hopes to open a physical space in the area in the future. During the recent pop-up clinic, the team spoke with about 9 residents.
We tried to do outreach through the local churches and community organizations that we are in contact with. We then scheduled individual appointments where we would call the people to discuss their issues. A lot of it was making sure they knew about the moratorium and making sure that they knew there was more rental assistance coming. We're still waiting for the details of that. So we couldn't give them the details, but we wanted to make sure they knew it was coming and to keep their eye out, and that we can now follow up with them when we do have more information. A couple of people also mentioned they had questions around unemployment because those benefits were suspended and have just kicked in. So it's really getting information out to people. And if there was a particular legal issue they needed help with, we could also consult with them on that. But for the most part, it was making sure people knew what was happening and what their rights were.
The Tulsa Day Center works year-round to prevent homelessness and offer support services, but its mission has become even more acute during the pandemic. Here's Executive Director Mac Halton.
We are a day center for folks that are experiencing homelessness that come in during the day. Primarily, when it first started, that's all it was, pretty much a center for folks to be at during the daytime. Over the years, we've evolved to a number, including a night shelter and case management and a clinic, and so many other programs related to those experiencing homelessness. Our mission is pretty simple. It's to serve those who are experiencing or at risk for homelessness.
The Day Center has been around for more than 30 years.
With COVID, our clinic numbers, as far as people coming inside the shelter itself, Back at the end of March, we had to pivot. We were averaging over 350 people a day coming through, and social distancing, CDC guidelines, and it was a concern of mine and our board and of course our rest of our staff of having that many people in, not knowing into March, what COVID was all about.
He says his concern was having to close the entire building due to fear of the spread of COVID-19.
What we decided to do, we kept case managers, my associate director and I, we met. We determined those that are most vulnerable, which included age, health, and some other factors, vulnerability-wise. And we kept those people sheltered in place. We started out with around 100 people in the beginning of COVID. We sheltered them in place both day and night, and we were no longer making day services available for the community. What we did do, I strategized with the city and the county, and we were able to receive some funding to open an overflow shelter at the old Juvenile Justice Center down the road from us a ways.
Haltom says the Tulsa Day Center partnered with the Salvation Army, which operated the night shelter portion. They sheltered anywhere from 55 to 70 people a day during the immediate crisis of COVID-19. They also began partnering with City Lights, which opened up a quarantine hotel for people who are positive for COVID-19 and experiencing homelessness.
We still have a lot of people on the streets, unsheltered, so we're continuing to strategize that. So we did that for the first 3 months, and then the last 3 months of the year, we partnered with the Mental Health Association at the same building, and we actually operated the night portion of the overflow shelter. The Mental Health Association of Oklahoma did the day piece. As of the end of the year, we're out of the overflow shelter at the Juvenile Justice Center, and the Mental Health Association of Oklahoma is running both day and night for the next 6 months.
The Tulsa Day Center case managers house 566 individuals, including 121 families in 2020. In 2019, 512 individuals were housed.
I'm very glad to say our rapid rehousing program really took off through this pandemic. We knew that we had to get people housed, so we did that. I think our numbers will show that by the end of the year, but I think at the end of November, we were close to 500 people being housed. That included a program we called homeless prevention. It's not eviction prevention, it's homeless prevention, meaning there are clients that we have housed before through our programs, and we didn't wait for an eviction notice to come about. If they needed assistance, they contacted us, and we continued to keep them in housing as needed.
About 2 miles away from the day center is another organization working to help people facing crisis. Restore Hope Ministries has been offering housing assistance for the past 25 years. Jeff Janes is the executive director.
It's not a new program for us. We've been helping prevent homelessness and prevent evictions for quite some time. Obviously, with the increase related to COVID and the economic impacts of COVID, we knew there was going to be an increase of need. 2019 was our biggest year ever before this last year. We had helped with $305,000. Which was actually $100,000 more than the grants that we received. And so we thought that wasn't sustainable. And just since May 1st of last year, we helped with about $3.5 million in rent assistance.
Using funds from local organizations like the Tulsa Area United Way and the Tulsa Community Foundation, Restore Hope was able to help with COVID-19 rent relief assistance.
We spent, of that $3.5 million, about $700,000 of that was through those funds. Right at the end of May, the Charles Schusterman Family Foundation came to us to ask if we could help with a program that they wanted to do. They wanted to keep people out of court. They wanted to keep people out of eviction. They wanted to prevent that public health problem. So they said, we're willing to pay all of that back rent that people had been filed on and some rent going forward. And there was a contract that we tried to get with landlords to do that. Unfortunately, that wasn't taken up by the landlords as much as we would have liked.
He says the COVID-19 funds and Schusterman funds really acted as a bridge until they started spending CARES Act money.
With the CARES Act money, it was obviously federal money came through the state. We were able to help hundreds of families with that program and really tried to reach out in as many ways as possible to help those families in need. All of those funds together was about $3.5 million from May 1st to the end of the year.
From May through December, Janes says Restore Hope was able to provide about $2,400 in rent assistance to each family. That's about a threefold increase over prior years.
All told, we were able to help about 1,400 households, 1,422 households that we were able to help from May 1st until the end of the year. And many of those households, we helped with multiple months of rent assistance. Some only needed one, some only needed the 1 month of help, but in many cases, we were able to help multiple months. In fact, I'd actually looked today, we were able to help 360 households with some of the Charles Schusterman Family Foundation funds that we had before. 360 households, even into January and some into February. Some of those families that we helped are still receiving that benefit even now.
They targeted specific populations who reside at apartment complexes that are known to have high rates of evictions, Janes explained.
I would say that from a demographic perspective, we wanted to make sure that the applications coming in and our assistance reaches a diverse population as well. We did specific outreach. We had an in-person event in North Tulsa at the 36th Street North Event Center. We've also done specific outreach to Hispanic families, people who speak Spanish as a primary language at home, because we knew that at least in the latter case, people who are Hispanic from the COVID numbers tend to be more at risk of COVID or tend to have a higher COVID positivity rate. So we knew that they were at risk from that public health perspective.
Janes said research shows the nexus of evictions in Tulsa County is at 51st and Memorial.
That's where the most evictions happen in our community. That said, evictions happen all over our community. We want to make sure that we are helping all of those places, not just in that one spot, but all over our community.
Another initiative that has helped people with housing was more ad hoc, created by a local business owner in Tulsa's Greenwood district. Benita Cooper is owner of Silhouette Sneakers and Art. She and other local business owners created an informal rent assistance initiative, a sort of mutual aid for Tulsans close to experiencing eviction.
It's funny, it wasn't really a program. Really, it started with the fact that we had customers who shopped with us throughout the year 2020 despite the pandemic, which allowed us to keep our doors open and positioned us to receive a really generous gift from Transformation Church. Towards the end of December, they came in and bought 186 pairs of sneakers to donate to a local boys' home. So they bought all of our sneakers. That happened, and we thought we have the ability now to focus on paying this back, this act of generosity or giving back to the community, doing things that typical, I think, retail store wouldn't usually do. But I think with the pandemic, knowing people are struggling with housing, they're struggling with food, they're struggling with jobs, we just felt like on the back of this blessing, we had a responsibility to reach out and support. It started with the idea that we would pay rent for one family. So we posted that on our Instagram and said, DM us if you need support. And we got over 200 requests. And it was representative of the crisis that we're currently in the midst of.
Others chipped into the initiative. They received about 100 donations from different businesses and individuals, raising over $20,000 and covering rent for more than 25 families.
It was incredible to be able to do that. Ultimately, we feel like we represent the heart of Tulsa, and other businesses and other people would do what they could. If they could, they would try to support these families, and we were just lucky enough to be in a position to do it.
Cooper notes Tulsa's eviction rate as a reason for the creation of the initiative.
Even before the pandemic, I'm pretty sure that Tulsa had one of the highest rates of eviction in the country. We knew unless there was some drastic policy change, which, why would that happen as resources shrink for a community? Unless something drastic happened, that eviction situation was only going to worsen, and it did. It's interesting. When I first got started with Silhouette, I noticed that businesses would say, we're apolitical, we don't get involved in politics. And to me, it's like, well, I actually don't believe that you can be apolitical as a business. When you're that public, I think not saying anything is almost like supporting the status quo. Politics is a part of your community, right? It's a part of advancing your community and improving things. We're jumping right in the fray. It could have been something else, but we just felt like housing just seemed like the most important thing. If you have a home and some stability there, that can be a foundation for you to get the other things that you need.
In most cases, the money was sent quickly and seamlessly over an app like Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal. That made it easy for recipients to receive the money without hassle. In some cases, Cooper went to the landlords and paid the rent.
Some of the families, they weren't very tech savvy. And so there were times where I actually had to go directly to a landlord to pay. Those were fascinating interactions. Some of them would actually allude to eviction, like, if this didn't happen, they were going to get evicted, which was interesting because they had already announced that the eviction moratorium had been extended. I had this one conversation where this landlord was like, I said, the moratorium has been extended. And they're like, well, we would still file. The eviction just wouldn't happen until the moratorium ended. And I was like, what? It just struck me that was their perspective. Like that was the way that they were approaching the situation. Like the moratorium should signal to them that these are unusual circumstances. that they should do what they can to be compassionate and to find ways to work with these families. Instead, they almost resent it, some of them. Now, there are great landlords out there, I just want to say, but we had to interact with some that just were not awesome.
Unfortunately, evictions in the North Tulsa community also extend to its businesses. Tori Tyson is a business owner in what remains of the historic Greenwood district. Blowout Hair Studio has been in the family for generations, but due to rent increases and threats of eviction, both prior to and during the pandemic, the family business is in jeopardy. Protesters were lined along the block in front of Tori's studio on a bitter cold and overcast January evening. City Councilor Vanessa Hall Harper was out with the protesters.
We're out here once again, standing in solidarity with Tori Tyson in Blowout Studio. We're going to keep fighting to keep her here. Her families have been here, had this same spot for over 40 years. They are the longest standing black business owner on Greenwood. And we're going to continue to support her as long as it takes, so that she stays here on Greenwood.
Councilor Hall Harper spoke about a revolving door of board members who have left the chamber due to issues they have had with the leadership of Freeman Culver, the Greenwood Chamber Board President. She believes the Greenwood Chamber is seemingly working against its own legacy.
I think a large part of the problem is that they're not from here, and so they're not known in this community, they're not respected in this community, and they don't have the respect for the community. Otherwise, they wouldn't be making decisions like this. Clearly, their heart is in the wrong place. They are only being concerned with profit and money as opposed to what black entrepreneurship in Greenwood means. And so it's further complicated by the fact that they do not engage with the community or its citizens. If you call and ask to join the chamber, they will tell you they're not accepting members, because chambers have to answer to their membership. That's how chambers work, their membership organization. And if you don't want to answer to anyone, it's quite simple. You just don't have members. And that's the strategy, if you will, for lack of a better term, that they're using. We don't want to be accountable to anyone, so we just don't have membership. And so they're able to do these decisions and make these decisions in the dark when no one knows who they are or what they are about.
Councilor Hall Harper explained what honoring the legacy might look like as opposed to this.
Well, for one, you don't kick black businesses out. You try to help them. You should try to help them and make sure they stay in business. You don't treat them unfairly, right? Raise their rent and not others. And you just support them as much as you possibly can. As far as any tenant down here, you should make sure that they have hot water. You should make sure that they have operating restrooms. You should make sure that what they are paying for, they're getting. And that's just not been the case with Tori. And she's been vocal about that. So they're trying to kick her out. They're steadily increasing her rent, but yet she's still having problems with her facility. And that's not fair. If my rent is continuing to go up, why can't you address my concerns as a business person? And they have failed in doing that, failed miserably. And of course, what's the justification of increasing their leasing rent if you're not making the repairs that's needed in this space? And so I think it was just a tactic to push her out. Let's keep raising it and raising it and raising it so that she can just throw her hands up and leave. And that's just not honoring the history and the legacy of Black Wall Street.
According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, the COVID-19 economic shutdown has hurt black businesses the most among racial and ethnic groups in the U.S., with a 41% decline of black business owners from February to April of 2020. Nearly half of all U.S. black-owned businesses have been wiped out by the pandemic, as compared to 32% of Latinx businesses, 26% of Asian businesses, and 17% of white-owned businesses. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce notes that, quote, minority-owned business owners are more likely than non-minority owners to report difficulty obtaining loans, express fears about permanently closing, and predict declining revenues in the coming year, unquote.
She is a single mother, raising 3 sons, and she's doing a damn good job at it. She runs and operates her own business. And for them to take that stance or to make that decision, it's wrong on so many levels. It's wrong on so many levels, on top of the fact that we are going through, a COVID pandemic in this world. And it's just a time that almost everybody is struggling. And that's just not how you show you love and support black entrepreneurship and the history of Greenwood.
Councilor Hall Harper noted solutions she helped introduce to the community to undo the systemic issues that affect Black Tulsans, her district, and its businesses.
The fact of the matter is the Greenwood Chamber stopped functioning as a business organization. They stopped helping and providing resources to Black businesses. They chose to focus more so on leasing these building spaces than providing those resources and support for Black entrepreneurship. And so because that gap existed, there were several of us that started the Black Wall Street Chamber of Commerce to fill that gap. And so I just want to make that abundantly clear that this does not have anything to do with being adversarial. It's a matter of these are some of the things that are needed in this community, or any community for that matter, to support Black entrepreneurship, and we want to make sure that it is available. We also created, in addition to that, the Power Group, which is the economic development arm of the Chamber, to rebuild our community, to buy back our land, particularly our land in Greenwood, but also our land throughout our communities. And so we can start making the decisions and developing what we want in our community, as opposed to letting people outside of our community make those decisions for us. In my history as a counselor and just living here, it came to the point where every time you saw development, whenever you saw dirt turning, a month or two passes and it's a dollar store, right? And so if we want to see differently, we have to do it ourselves, because people outside of our community that don't live here, that are not invested here, they're only going to put what they think we need in our community that's going to turn a buck, that's going to be profitable. We wanted to create the Power Group as a way that anyone in the community, anyone throughout this city, not just the Black community, but anyone in the community that want to see development, true development that's focused on building businesses in our community, can contribute. And that's what we're doing. We certainly encourage you to go onto our website. You can go onto the Black Wall Street Chamber of Commerce website, and you will also find as an option the Power Group. And we encourage you to join and contribute regularly, monthly, $20, $25, whatever you can. Contribute regularly so that we can start buying back our land and returning that to the community.
The Greenwood Chamber of Commerce disputes these claims. In a statement sent to Focus Black Oklahoma, the chamber writes, quote, "There have not been any threats. Ms. Tyson was 225 days on paying her correct rent starting in January 2020. She admitted that she was going to pay whatever she felt like paying. That went on for 11 months, which made her 3 months behind in rent. This bad payment history is nothing new. She has done this before in previous years. She has also previously written bad checks, and she has also verbally and physically harassed Greenwood Chamber Board members, staff, vendors, and other tenants on Greenwood. But the issue at hand is that she did not want to pay her minimal rent increase, which she agreed on and felt like it was not a burden to her and her business. As far as the condition of the building, please come visit. We are currently putting a new roof on both buildings, doing brickwork restoration, and a plethora of other needed things. The buildings are in the best condition they have been in decades." Unquote.
On December 11, 2020, in Oklahoma City, in a pawn shop parking lot, a widely known community member and homeless man with mental health issues, Benny Edwards, was shot and killed by Oklahoma City police officers. Shortly after the shooting, protesters arrived on the scene to mourn the loss of a local figure who sold flowers to neighbors, friends, and strangers. An estimated 568,000 Americans experienced homelessness in 2019. Black Americans accounted for about 40% of that total, according to the annual Homeless Assessment Report to Congress. Despite making up just 13% of the U.S. population, Black Americans account for a staggeringly disproportionate chunk of the nation's homeless population. While the rate of bipolar disorder is the same among Black Americans as it is among other Americans, Black Americans are less likely to receive a diagnosis and therefore treatment for this illness, according to Mental Health America.
He's bipolar, schizophrenic. He probably thought that he was in danger. He wouldn't hurt a fly. And had they stopped and talked to him, they would have known. They would have known that.
My name's Tyler Perrette. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Manager for Housing Solutions Tulsa, which is the lead agency for Tulsa's Continuum of Care, the lead of the collaborative partners for A Way Home for Tulsa. I see experiences like that. I see events like that happen, and I think of people that I work with here in Tulsa every week. I was called out on an experience yesterday morning, and there was an individual that had slipped into a business downtown overnight because they left their door unlocked. And when I arrived on scene, called by the property owner, TPD was there interested in charging him with a felony breaking and entering. And I was nervous for that guy. I was nervous that he was going to go to jail for a while, and that wasn't necessarily the place that he needed to be. He needed a warm place to sleep.
A fact that gets lost on officers who see an individual who can harm them as opposed to a person who needs help. Tyler went on to explain the ways that Housing Solutions partners with and educates the Tulsa Police Department, as well as everyday citizens, including dispelling more myths that plague a community that needs empathetic solutions.
So I think that Housing Solutions can help prevent things from happening like what happened in Oklahoma City a couple different ways. One, it's that direct engagement. It's the direct engagement with law enforcement. It's the direct engagement with business owners to advocate for the fact that there are other ways that we can approach this situation than calling 911 and pursuing criminal charges. There's just other ways we can do it. There's other ways that people are doing it all over the country. And Housing Solutions is actively doing that. I meet with all of the majors for every TPD police division. TPD, by and large, is really great to work with and interested in that collaborative effort and interested in pursuing solutions for folks on the street. They don't like seeing the same people out on the street every week any more than you and I do. They've been a really great partner at that table, but those conversations need to keep happening. And same with business owners. I think the second piece that is key in preventing things from happening in Oklahoma City, like what happened in Oklahoma City, from happening in Tulsa, is this constant education of the people living in our city that just because someone is experiencing homelessness does not mean they are dangerous. Just because someone is experiencing a mental health incident or episode does not mean they are dangerous. And that it is far more likely someone who is experiencing homelessness or someone who is having some type of traumatic event regarding their mental health to be the victim of a crime than it is for them to perpetrate a crime. It's terrifying to me because I know a lot of the folks experiencing homelessness in Tulsa really well. And it can be scary when, emotions get high and oftentimes people have trouble expressing themselves. But I think that we are conditioned culturally and socially to believe that people experiencing homelessness are dangerous, and that's just not true. And so a lot of that prevention starts with people realizing that just because somebody's out on the street, it means they need help. It doesn't mean we need to call 911.
Citizens are still grieving for Benny Edwards' death at the hands of police and scores of other high-profile police killings of Black men. Mental health issues and homelessness multiply the chances of being killed by police as compared to the rest of the population, like the untimely death of Patrick Warren in Texas this January, who was experiencing a mental health crisis, or Kurt Reinhold last September, a Black homeless man who was killed by police for jaywalking in California. No one tracks police brutality against those who are unsheltered. So you may be wondering, would it be possible to call 911, but instead get social services to respond to a situation, as opposed to a response that could end in lethal force or criminalization?
No, that would be awesome. Again, it goes back to capacity thing, like bandwidth. Right now, Mental Health Association has a team that's one team that's out 4 days a week. Housing Solutions has 2 teams out 8 to 5 days a week. I'm about to add a third one next week. And those are the 2 that are kind of responding to different things. But, we don't even have close to the bandwidth that we need to be able to implement something like that. That would be ideal, right? Is you and I could call, would say, I feel like there's a social services emergency. And then they would collaboratively work with other emergency services as needed.
As a part of a continuum of care organization, Tyler goes out to highway encampments, off-trail makeshift shelters, behind strip malls, and through wooded areas as he takes calls from police, code enforcement officers, and business owners to engage with people experiencing homelessness. Tyler talked about popular myths used against people experiencing homelessness and how just getting a job is one of many problematic starts to solving the foundational issue at hand.
What you're talking about is the housing first philosophy and the housing first model that's been pretty widely adopted across the country as a best practice. One of the first principles of the housing first model is that housing is the primary cause of homelessness, or lack of housing is the primary cause of homelessness, which seems to be apparent and seems to make a lot of sense. But a lot of times when we develop systems to alleviate problems like homelessness, we tend to put a lot of barriers in the way between what someone is experiencing as homelessness out on the street and ultimately what the solution is, which is housing. So oftentimes those barriers look like, well, people need to have a job first, or, well, they need to get clean, or they need to make sure and get their health stuff in order, and then they'll be able to sustain their housing. But what we found and what data demonstrates is that when people can achieve housing early, a housing first model, all of a sudden everything else is a lot easier to fall into place. When someone has housing, they have better health outcomes. When someone has housing, they're able to find a job and retain a job more easily. When someone has housing, they're able to have better mental health outcomes because their stuff isn't getting stolen and they can lock the door and stay safe at night. So ultimately, a lot of the things that it takes to sustain a lifestyle in housing starts with the housing process being the integral first step in that.
And in order to facilitate that end outcome, many obstacles can be at the starting line.
Traditionally, the way we have thought about homelessness is that people experiencing homelessness need to go out and access resources to remedy that situation. That creates a lot of barriers, especially for people that are geographically removed from the resources that are available. So one of the unique things that Housing Solutions is doing that other teams in Tulsa have been doing for a period of time as well, like Mental Health Association and Family and Children's Services, is that we've created an outreach team that can go meet people where they are and initiate housing plans. We can help reestablish identification with birth certificates, IDs, social security cards. We can do common assessments, which allow us to make housing recommendations based on somebody's vulnerability, and then even do other referrals to other agencies, all from on-site wherever that person happens to be. So they don't have to set an appointment time or come to a specific geographic location to receive those services. Our outreach teams can do that in the field and then follow up with that individual in the field continuously until we achieve housing.
We joined Tyler and his outreach team on their third day of the annual Point in Time Count. The Point in Time Count is conducted every year in the last week of January in cities across the country where outreach workers and volunteers go to local shelters and encampments to count and collect useful data concerning individuals and families experiencing homelessness. Typically, the count is done in one day to create a full snapshot of homelessness at a point in time. However, due to the COVID-19 pandemic, an influx of volunteers were ruled out to protect the outreach team and the already vulnerable homeless population. The count was conducted over a 4-day period instead, as recommended by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. The count and data from surveys given to participants is used to help advocate for resources to end homelessness and understand trends of homelessness over time. Tyler notes that this is the first year that Tulsa will feature geolocation data as they survey participants in the field, which will help advocates best utilize resources at hand to help the homeless community in Tulsa's sprawling landscape. We asked Tyler about the specific challenges of homelessness in North Tulsa, and the reality is that there wasn't geographic data on homelessness across the city just yet. But that's changing.
The pit count very specifically targets both sheltered and unsheltered individuals experiencing homelessness. And Iron Gate as an organization is pretty unique in that they serve both sheltered and unsheltered individuals experiencing homelessness. So this is a really great place to kind of home base out of, because focusing on the unsheltered population and making sure that they're represented in the pit count, there's a lot of unsheltered folks that access Iron Gate for food resources as well as connection to a lot of other case management.
Iron Gate is located along the Archer Corridor, sometimes referred to as the Justice District. This is just blocks from the David L. Moss Criminal Justice Center. Foot traffic in the area largely consists of justice-involved individuals or the homeless population. It's a concentrated area of resources for the homeless community that has its pros and cons. On the one hand, there is a central location of necessary services located downtown. On the other hand, it creates a dense concentration of vulnerable people.
The Archer Corridor specifically presents a unique problem because you have a lot of folks that have access to shelter that then are moved out of shelter during the day so that shelters can kind of reset. There's not a ton of resources during the day right now because of COVID. Like folks that are hanging out on the Archer Corridor traditionally might have gone to the library. They might have gone to other businesses that they can go in and kind of hang out. But then other than that, I mean, it's also people experiencing homelessness also tend to be victims of a lot of crime. They tend to be victims of human trafficking. They are oftentimes deep in some addiction. And so dealers and other individuals that are preying on the homeless community target areas that people tend to hang out and frequent. And so there's a decent chance that TPD is down in that area responding to people who are preying on individuals experiencing homelessness, but certainly have to require people to move and change locations occasionally as well based on business complaints or other different code violations. So it's kind of this unique and oftentimes tense relationship between the police and individuals experiencing homelessness.
There is a consistent police presence on Archer due to the concentration of people that are either assumed to be dangerous, victims of a crime themselves, or simply on a path of assistance. During our conversation, there were 2 police vehicles with lights flashing. We asked Tyler more about the relationship between TPD and Housing Solutions and their mutual relationship with people experiencing homelessness.
Yeah, absolutely. And that relationship is still growing, but I can certainly tell you that it's better than it was 2 years ago when I first started in earnest doing outreach work. We have monthly calls with TPD in the city of Tulsa where we talk about specific outreach needs in different TPD divisions, specific issues they're seeing, and how outreach can engage with that and provide long-term solutions as opposed to quick fixes like jail or different fines. We also collaborate really closely with TPD because we work with a population, like I mentioned, that are often victims of crime that doesn't get reported. And so we are advocates for our clients, first and foremost. And so if our clients are victims of crime, we engage with TPD to try to prevent that from happening in the future. And that's certainly an important part of what we do, is help advocate for our clients in that space. I think that the other way that TPD has been engaging with us recently is we partner with different divisions. When they respond to a situation with someone experiencing homelessness that's not connected to resources, they reach out to us and connect us with that individual so that we can make sure and connect them to the resources that are available so that they're not just falling through the gaps over and over. So we're trying to create a more robust net so that when people are interacting with law enforcement or code enforcement, that's also a way that they can be connected to services instead of just continuing to operate with these enforcement agencies without ever being connected to resources that can potentially better their situation.
Tulsa experienced back-to-back-to-back storms, leading to hazardous ice, dangerously cold negative-degree temperatures, and a foot or more of snow in many areas. 2 unsheltered people died due to the sub-freezing temperatures. In another instance, there was a report of city workers taking firewood from an encampment. The encampment was dubbed the MEZ by local mutual aid group Tulsa Food Not Bombs. MEZ meaning the Maybell Emergency Zone, with Maybell Avenue being the road that intersects the dead-end overpass where people experiencing homelessness routinely set up camps. It may be worth noting that it is located just a block off of the Archer Corridor. The group sought to amplify the voice and needs of unsheltered people during these brutal storms and deadly temperatures. They made calls for donations from Tulsa citizens to buy food, supplies, and other necessary items to survive this particularly harsh storm, including hand warmers, clothing, and other heat sources to avoid freezing. Firewood was donated in large sums, but created an unfortunate bureaucratic and communication conflict between Tulsa Food Not Bombs, the Tulsa Fire Department, Tulsa Police, and the Tulsa Area Emergency Management Agency during a dire humanitarian crisis. Tulsa Food Not Bombs volunteers, including Foxy, have been taking day and overnight shifts to receive and distribute donations, serve weekly meals, communicate with residents, as well as ensure the belongings of residents in the mezz stay put until the weather gets better. They told us more about how their mutual aid operation escalated during conflicts with city entities.
One of the city's trucks was out here with flashing lights. It caused two of the younger folks that live here to have seizures. One of their guardians was telling us that they were having seizures because of all of the commotion, because of these flashing lights. And one of the crew members from Food Not Bombs even actually asked the person to please turn their lights off, and they refused. It was really traumatic knowing this was a crisis situation, and it became even worse with two folks having seizures, and it was very traumatic. I can't even imagine what their guardian was going through. I just lost it and just sobbing because I was like, people could have died. Honestly, that night I spent here overnight that night, and I just could not stop thinking about the folks that were still here in this cold, and we were checking up on them, making sure they were good. We were giving them hand warmers and more blankets throughout the night. The entire thought process of my night was to check up on them and make sure that they were still alive and not frozen to death out here. It was below freezing that night. It was very traumatic for a lot of the folks here.
Foxy told us that before the city came to the site, that the Tulsa Fire Department was doing regular check-ins over 4-hour intervals from day to day to ensure there were no fire hazards at the mezz. Tulsa Fire had okayed the fire pits that Tulsa Food Not Bombs had placed along the middle of the underpass to keep away from any flammable items, and noted that the ash needed to be dumped on a regular basis. Though Foxy notes that a fire in a tent may have initiated the aggressive response.
I think at this point the fire department had already come out for a full day, and this was the second day that they had been coming out.
How long were they sticking around?
They would just come by for a couple minutes just to, check on the fires, make sure they were good. Wouldn't stay there too long. We were like, cool, we'll let that person know. This person had his fire in his tent for longer than we had been out here because these are people's homes. People have been living here for a good minute now. So what happened was that this person, he put the fire out. Fire department comes by and it was good. Person ended up putting out his fire, and then we're met at 6 o'clock or something like that with a bulldozer at the, at one end of the bridge, not the end where folks had started to donate firewood. And we were kind of shocked because we had been told, these fires were good, they were fine, and then all of a sudden we're met with this bulldozer, and we told them to go away, that we were okayed to be here by the fire department, our fires are fine, and they stopped for a couple seconds and then drove away. About 30 minutes later, someone from the city and a cop come by telling us that our fires and our firewood were a hazard, all while the fire department was coming out telling us they were fine. So we were hearing two different things, and that's whenever things did start to escalate a little bit. Police it just sounded like they weren't communicating with the fire department fairly well, and they ended up having someone from the fire department come out as well, and I'm not sure what that conversation looked like because we were trying to have conversations with the folks here at the camp, the residents of the camp, reassuring them that the cops weren't going to destroy their things, that we were going to do whatever it took for folks to be able to make their own decisions and have autonomy over their lives and how they want to get through this cold snap, because that is ultimately what's important, is people's autonomy. That's again why folks aren't comfortable with going to shelters, is because they're forced to go to those places. There's a lot of trauma around them. There's a lot of abuse. People don't trust the city.
Feelings of mistrust between the city and unsheltered individuals has an antagonistic legal and institutional history. In 2017, Tulsa City Councilor Karen Gilbert, along with Tulsa police officers, successfully lobbied for an ordinance that increased fines to individuals who stand in the street, on the sidewalk or median, and solicit a ride, donations, or work. In August of 2020, an appeals court deemed a similar Oklahoma City anti-panhandling law as unconstitutional, a similar outcome for cities nationwide who have tried such criminalization methods to curb homelessness. In Tulsa, 6 of the top 10 panhandling sites are within 2 miles of the concentration of services along the Archer Corridor. In addition, the city of Tulsa has historically used Tulsa police officers as opposed to trauma-informed mental health or social workers to do clean sweeps and clearings of encampments. According to a 2015 assessment by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, 564,708 people were homeless on a given night in the United States. At a minimum, 140,000, or 25% of these people were seriously mentally ill, and 250,000, or 45%, had some form of mental illness.
That's pretty much what ended up happening with the firewood situation, and we ended up having some discussion with the guy that was sent out from the city and the cop, and telling them that they couldn't take this away from the people, that if they took it away, people wouldn't be able to survive out here. It was too cold. It was their only source of heat that the community of Tulsa had actively put in so much effort to donate and to bring out here to us, and now it was just going to be taken away from them. And it was heartbreaking seeing folks watch as this heat source that they had was going to be taken away and was being threatened. Someone from our crew even asked, why can't you guys help us with propane heaters or something? And the guy that was sent down from the city, he laughed at them and told them, well, why don't you ask the people who donated the firewood to donate propane heaters, which we did before making the decision to bring out fire pits. We had conversations with them, ended up being that they were set on the decision to take away the firewood. So that's what they did. They sent out a dump truck with a cherry picker, one of the cranes, and started loading up the firewood. And it was heartbreaking to the folks here, seeing that their only heat source for this cold snap was going to be taken away. And they sent out some folks from the fire department to put out the fire pits, and they put them out and they tossed them there onto the sidewalk. So now the folks were going to have to look at these fire pits that we were making fires in to keep people warm, and they were empty, not being used, and we weren't going to be able to use them. And then they told us at one point that things were just so hectic that it's hard to remember when they told us very specific things. But, a little bit after that, they told us that we had until 10 o'clock to clear food not bomb stuff out. So we had to start scrambling to clear out donations, the tons and tons of donations that people had brought and dropped off. We had to scramble to get those things in our volunteers' cars. One of the folks that has a lot of influence here, Mama is what she goes by, she ended up calling everybody for a big meeting, and we talked about it, and people then and there had to make their decisions of where they wanted to go, either a shelter or a hotel. And they had to try to gather their belongings in the couple hours that they were giving them. And it's really heartbreaking that you can't wrap up your entire home, your whole life, in a couple of hours. It's heartbreaking. And again, you can't wrap up your whole life, your whole home in a couple minutes, in 2 hours. We're still out here. We're still distributing supplies to anybody that comes through. We have been getting hotels for people that were coming through asking for them. We're at the point right now where it's just hard to find rooms for people.
After our conversation, we went on a drive to a few locations in North Tulsa. We spotted some clusters and structures of trash behind a gas station car wash. Telltale signs, but no one was there. Later, the backside of a bus stop. We met someone who didn't want to be interviewed, which wasn't too surprising. Tyler mentions that he's been working in the community for years, developing relationships and working through the often long process of getting people from wherever they may be to their desired housing location. This can be difficult due to low housing supply, less appropriate housing types available, and other variables that happen along the way.
Have you taken a survey today with anybody or yesterday? Yeah. So we're out doing the annual point in time count right now. It's a survey that we do of anyone who's out on the street or might be experiencing homelessness. that applicable for you?
So what's in the backpack?
Oh, this one, it's just got a hygiene pack in it with like some toothpaste, razor, stuff like that.
Cool.
Yeah, some hand sanitizer, I'm pretty sure, and then there's also sexual health stuff in there.
Nice.
Some condoms.
Very cool.
Yeah, feminine products and stuff like that. So,
Nice.
yeah, just anything you might need.
Makes sense.
So, yeah.
Eventually, we reached a highway which intersected with some freight railway lines behind a distribution warehouse. An encampment that completely took over the underpass was sequestered under the massive columns of the highway. Walking into the encampment, there could have easily been dozens of people, but again, no one this afternoon. Still, it is remarkable to see tree houses, radios, chandeliers even among piles of trash and corners of furniture marking clear living quarters with belongings below this typically unseen and often ignored space. It is sobering to be in the presence of the dystopian qualities that existed well before the pandemic and how these places not built for human habitat have likely only had more residents over recent months. This is where mainstream society has pushed its undesirables. A space so infrequently thought of, invisible, and hardly fit for habitation is unspokenly deemed as the default for people that have fallen into dire circumstances. Now, another crisis among crises as COVID-19 throws a wrench into the work of those helping this particularly vulnerable community.
To really think about how COVID-19 has impacted homelessness in Tulsa writ large, you have to go back to March when comparatively, none of us knew anything about COVID. We were terrified. We were terrified that it would spread like wildfire through the homeless community here in Tulsa. We were terrified about what that might do to our neighbors and friends on the street who were medically very vulnerable. A lot of outreach teams pulled back completely because they didn't want to risk exposing people that they were working with to what we knew at the time was a deadly virus, but knew little more than that.
So outreach services stopped. Shelters drastically reduced their capacity. And unfortunately, Tyler says that catalyzed a huge increase in folks living out on the streets with even fewer options than usual.
So the need for outreach was going up at the same time our capacity for outreach was going down. There were programs that we developed as a community to kind of augment some of these issues. We developed the City Lights Hotel. So City Lights Foundation developed City Lights Hotel. I was a part in helping implement that program when I worked for City Lights. It allowed for quarantine space for 60 people, up to 60 people. At the time, we didn't entirely need 60 quarantine beds, but now when COVID is kind of running through Tulsa, it's good to have that capacity. As a community, and Day Center and Mental Health Association also helped develop the overflow shelter using the old Juvenile Justice Center out on the west side, which increased our ability and our capacity to bring people in for emergency shelter and also to utilize day services inside. But what we still saw was this dramatic reduction in outreach services.
And with outreach services crippled by the pandemic, allies and protections for the homeless community are in even shorter supply.
What we see is we're still serving a very vulnerable population. So risk of exposure is still on the forefront of most outreach workers' minds. We try to limit the number of people engaging with any particular encampment or with any particular individual experiencing homelessness, just like you and I are limiting our bubbles. We try to help to do that for the people that we're serving. We also try to really stick to a lot of the recommendations coming out of the CDC. So we wear our masks all the time. We try to maintain that 6-foot distance. Oftentimes that can be hard when you're working with people in crisis or when you're working with people that might not necessarily understand those recommendations. But we try to adhere to those as best we possibly can.
There are hundreds of people experiencing homelessness in Tulsa. But with programs, agencies, businesses, and community organizations, from churches to mutual aid groups, and the collaborative outreach approach that teams at Housing Solutions of Tulsa and Mental Health Association are bringing to the table, a more equitable future is finding a solid foundation. All welcome alternatives to what's become an unfortunate standard of fines, jail time, or use of force towards vulnerable communities. These groups are explicitly giving agency to people experiencing homelessness to help carve a path towards necessary services and ultimately stability and dignity through intentional and crucial communication using data and infrastructure to inform their delivery of care.
We want to thank you for listening to the third and final segment in a series examining COVID-19 in North Tulsa. Our team includes Ariel Davis, Christy Eaton, Jamie Glisson, and Colby Webster. Focus, Black Oklahoma's associate producers are Bracken Clark and Ali Shah. Our executive producer is Quresh Ali Lansana. Thanks also to Solutions Journalism Network and Tulsa Artist Fellowship. Focus, Black Oklahoma is a project of Tri-City Collective.
KOSU has a podcast to bring you news on what's happening in the state of Oklahoma. The KOSU Daily includes local headlines. State Impact reporters will bring us the latest on education, healthcare, and criminal justice. And we have news focusing on agriculture and rural issues, as well as Indigenous affairs. You can subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. The KOSU Daily, Oklahoma news every weekday.
KOSU is nonprofit radio. More than half of our funds come from the community, listeners just like you. Join thousands of listeners and donate now at kosu.org.